I used to firmly believe that blood ties were bonds etched deep into our very bones, that the word family meant unwavering loyalty and betrayal was simply unthinkable until that stormy, torrential night when my faith was utterly shattered. I'm Zelda Reed, 35, a seasoned brand strategist who spent a decade clawing her way up in Portland's creative industry. For Jasper's promotion party, I not only fronted $60,000 but also personally handled every single detail. The party was set at Tidal Bay Restaurant, a top-tier waterfront venue in Portland, specifically chosen to celebrate his milestone achievement, his promotion to project director at the creative firm. I hadn't asked for anything extravagant, not even a sincere word of thanks, or a single mention in front of friends and family that this time, it was all thanks to my sister. Yet the look he gave me as he stood under the spotlight, smiling broadly and casually linking arms with a stranger, was colder and more distant than the rain outside the window. Standing there under the bright lights, he introduced the man to the crowd with an exaggerated grin. "This is Caleb, the rock-solid backbone of my career, a partner closer to me than family itself." But I was casually pushed by his assistant to a corner table near the kitchen, its tablecloth still stained with uncleaned grease. My parents, Diana and Felix, actually walked over, laughing, and said in front of 50 guests, "Oh, she's just here to lend a hand, helping us keep an eye on the details." Among those guests were Jasper's boss, key clients from the cultural and creative industries, all the connections he'd been desperately trying to cultivate. I froze in place, my cheeks burning as if they were about to burst into flames, listening as they joined my parents in chuckling, as if all my painstaking efforts had been nothing more than a joke meant for everyone's amusement. I'd pulled him out of the mire, yet now he'd turned around and trampled me into the dust, erasing every trace of my existence completely. But I didn't cry. I didn't lose it. I just sat quietly in the corner, watching the phony warmth unfolding on stage, and on my lips there even lingered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Until my phone in my pocket vibrated, a reminder from event manager Genevieve confirming the final payment. With a gentle tap of my fingertips, I opened the payment app and, without a second thought, canceled that $40,000 final payment. An hour later, the restaurant's food-serving line suddenly came to a halt. Waitstaff began clearing away untouched dishes, and the bar hung up a sign that read, "Service suspended." 50 guests exchanged uneasy glances, hunger and frustration slowly spreading through the room. Slowly, I stood up, made my way onto the stage amid the growing commotion, and picked up the microphone, still warm from Jasper's touch. The truth is sharper than any lie. I was about to watch the glittering world he'd painstakingly built crumble right before his very eyes. Want to know what happened next? Don't scroll past. This farce's climax has only just begun. Before we continue, leave a comment and tell me which city you're in and what time it is now. I'd love to see just how far the story of betrayal and retaliation has already spread across the map. I still remember that old, drafty house in East Portland. Every winter, the heating system would always break down, and biting cold winds would seep in through the cracks in the windows. It was me every day after school, taking a detour to the convenience store for odd jobs, just so Jasper could have a warm dinner while I myself had to settle for dry bread. It was me who pooled together whatever tiny living expenses my parents had left and handed it all over to him. No matter how empty the fridge became, with only a few expired bottles of ketchup left, I'd always let him mix them into his noodles first. Now, at 35, looking back, all I see is that little girl who did everything she could to protect her younger brother. My parents were always too busy, chasing their dreams. Diana worked as a freelance writer and rarely turned in her assignments. Felix wandered around as an independent photographer. All the heavy burdens of the family fell squarely on my shoulders. I took Jasper to school, patched up his worn-out backpack with glue and cardboard, and told him stories about how we'd one day live in a beachfront apartment. He'd wrap his arms around my neck and laugh, his eyes shining bright like stars, promising again and again, "Sis, when I grow up, I'll make sure you live a good life and we'll never, ever be apart." Jasper was able to get into art school, all thanks to me. At the advertising agency, I juggled 2 jobs. During the day, I worked as a planner, At night, I took on copywriting. Every single penny, no matter how small, was scraped together to cover his tuition and living expenses. When our parents couldn't afford the rent and were kicked out of their home, it was I who borrowed money from friends to keep us housed. To do that, I even had to give up the design show opportunity I'd long dreamed of. Back then, Jasper was so grateful. Every time he came home for vacation, he'd bring me little gifts and hug me tightly, saying, "Sister, don't worry. I'll take on all the burdens once I graduate and start working. I'll definitely repay you handsomely." But after he landed a job at a well-known cultural and creative company in the city center, he completely changed. Now 30, he started wearing custom-made suits, and his spending skyrocketed far beyond what it used to be. He called me less and less often, and his text messages became nothing but perfunctory replies like, oh, or "I'm busy." Whenever I invited him out for dinner, he'd always make excuses, saying he had to accompany clients or attend cocktail parties. Once, I overheard him lying to a colleague, claiming that he'd grew up in privilege, with parents who were famous artists and cultural figures, and that he needed to break free from mediocrity and join the high-end social circle, as if I and our humble past were stains on his glamorous new life. His distance cuts me to the core. At family gatherings, he talks endlessly about industry heavyweights, treating our childhood, when we weathered life's storms together, as a secret, never once mentioning me, his older sister. He even deliberately avoids family topics and spins lies to his colleagues, claiming he's succeeded solely through personal effort. To him, I've become like a shameful mark reminding him of his humble origins, and gradually, he's begun to erase me from his life. I try to comfort myself, telling myself it's just his youthful restlessness as he adjusts to a new circle, but deep down, I know he's already started seeing me as a burden. Still, when he announced he was being promoted to project director, I proactively offered to organize a celebration party, hoping he'd remember our childhood promises and the days when we relied on each other so closely. When I asked about the party details, he brushed me off impatiently. But when he said he needed a new suit to make a good impression, I still sent the money. He accepted it as if it were his due, not even bothering to say thank you. Countless nights I've lain awake, unable to understand how that little boy who used to sweetly promise never to part has turned into such a cold-hearted man. Thinking back to the days when I'd go hungry, stay up late working to earn a living, and give up on my own dreams for him, I still desperately try to convince myself that he's just temporarily lost. But those text messages that went unanswered, those calls that were abruptly hung up, each one reminds me, he's building a world without me. All I can do is confide in my colleague Lena, who comforts me by saying I've already done more than enough and urging me not to keep putting myself through this pain. Yet deep down, I still cling to that last sliver of hope, hoping he'll publicly thank me, his older sister, for everything I've done at the party. At that moment, I had no idea that this party, which I'd poured my heart and soul into organizing, would mark the end of our family bond and also serve as the starting point for my complete awakening. The Tidal Bay restaurant was already buzzing with excitement. 50 clients and colleagues from the cultural and creative industries raised their glasses, laughing and chatting merrily, while a jazz band played Moon River. This lavish celebration was something I'd gritted my teeth and shelled out $60,000 to make happen. As I stepped into the room wearing my formal gown, my heart full of anticipation, I couldn't wait to raise a toast to Jasper's promotion. Every single detail of the party, from the menu to the floral arrangements, was meticulously finalized by me and event manager Genevieve, down to the smallest detail. That very afternoon, she even made a special call to double-check the $30,000 transfer we'd made earlier. After hanging up, I felt brimming with anticipation. No matter how much distance had existed between us before, at this crucial moment, Jasper would surely acknowledge all my efforts and publicly address me as sister. But when I finally spotted Jasper near the stage, his gaze swept over me as if I were a complete stranger. He merely gave me a quick nod and said curtly, "You're here," then immediately turned around to greet his boss, the founder of the cultural creative company, Theodore. This perfunctory treatment stung deeply, yet I forced myself to suppress my hurt and comforted myself with the thought, He's busy attending to an important client. Once it's his turn to speak on stage, he'll definitely mention me. Slowly weaving through the crowd, I tried my best to smile and exchange brief nods with Jasper's colleagues, but the tightness in my chest only grew stronger and stronger. Just then, I heard Diana and Felix chatting near the bar with a stylishly dressed couple who seemed to be Jasper's key clients. Diana's laugh was sharp and deliberately loud, drowning out the band's music. "Oh, you mean her? She's Zelda. She's just helping us handle the little chores around the party." Felix chimed in, his tone dripping with disdain. "Yeah, she's a brand strategist, so she's always dealing with these trivial tasks anyway. It's perfect that she's lending a hand." The her they were talking about, that was me, the very person who'd emptied my savings account for this party and even turned down an important job to make it happen. The words little chores and lending a hand, they felt like needles piercing straight into my heart. Not only had I paid $60,000, but I'd also personally coordinated with every single vendor and double-checked every single detail. And yet, they reduced all my hard work to nothing more than handling some minor chores. I held my breath, feeling as if my blood might freeze. Diana seemed to sense my gaze and turned her head to glance at me briefly. A mocking smile curled up at the corner of her lips, as if she were saying, "That's exactly what you're good at." Felix, meanwhile, completely ignored me, continuing his lively conversation with the client and enthusiastically touting Jasper, describing him as young and promising and from a family steeped in culture. I clenched the wine glass in my hand. The cool surface of the glass brought a slight flicker of clarity to my mind. I told myself that I couldn't lose it right here, couldn't ruin Jasper's party, even though neither he nor his parents had ever given me the slightest bit of consideration. Not long after, a man dressed in a plaid suit tapped me on the shoulder and asked casually, "Excuse me, when will the desserts be served? Our clients have been waiting for half an hour already." His tone carried a hint of impatience, clearly mistaking me for a restaurant staff member. I forced myself to suppress the anger boiling inside me and nodded, saying, "I'm not a restaurant employee, but I'll go ask the event manager for you." As soon as I finished speaking, I felt the air in the room grow unbearably hot, and the band's music suddenly seemed piercingly loud. Standing there, I glanced around at the elegantly dressed guests, and suddenly I felt like an intruder, completely out of place. I walked over to the bar, intending to order a glass of ice water to calm down. Just then, a young waiter, who looked utterly exhausted, was tidying up some wine glasses. He looked up and met my gaze for a brief moment. In his eyes, I saw a flicker of understanding and compassion. He didn't say a word. He simply poured me a glass of ice water, slid it gently across the counter toward me, and gave me a slight nod. That silent gesture felt like a warm current flowing through me, easing the tension that had been gripping my nerves ever so slightly. I picked up the glass of ice water and took a sip. The cool liquid slid smoothly down my throat, gradually clearing my muddled thoughts. Jasper, Diana, Felix, they can look down on me. They can even dismiss all my efforts, but I refuse to let myself be treated unjustly for nothing. This party was paid for by me, and I have every right to make them realize who's really been the one putting in the effort for Jasper. At 8 p.m., the atmosphere in the restaurant reached its peak, and the jazz band switched to a livelier tune. Standing at the edge of the crowd, I couldn't take my eyes off Jasper as he stepped onto the stage. He took the microphone from the host's hand and, with a radiant smile, addressed the entire audience. "Being able to stand here today, I'd like to especially thank one person, the one who reached out to me during my toughest moments and has been supporting my career all along. To me, he's like family." My heart leapt into my throat in an instant. I stared intently at him, eagerly waiting for him to say my name. But just a second later, he pointed toward Caleb, who was standing off to the side of the stage, and said with a grin, "That's Caleb, our company's senior designer. Every single project's success wouldn't have been possible without his help." The entire room immediately erupted in enthusiastic applause. Diana and Felix stood in the front row, grinning from ear to ear, looking just like two proud parents. Diana turned to Theodore beside her and said, "Caleb really is a great help." Jasper wouldn't be where he is today without him. Felix nodded in agreement. That's right. Those two work together so seamlessly, it's as if they're brothers. My throat felt as though something were choking me, dry and painful. I'd spent $60,000 throwing this party, all to save face for him in front of clients and his boss, but instead, he'd given all the credit to an outsider. Caleb was just an ordinary designer on Jasper's team. Normally, he'd never even helped Jasper much at all, and Jasper knew that better than anyone. Unconsciously, I glanced toward my seat, a corner near the kitchen, with shelves piled high with odds and ends right next to the table. Waitstaff hurried past, carrying trays of food, occasionally bumping into my chair. This isn't some random seating arrangement at all. It's deliberate. They've deliberately hidden me here, not wanting me to show up in front of the important people. I slowly walk over and sit down, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The guests around me are still enthusiastically discussing the development of the cultural and creative industries and the latest collaborative projects. They have no idea that every bite of food they're eating and every sip of wine they're drinking is being paid for with money I've earned through sheer hard work. Even less do they realize that this woman, treated like a mere servant, is actually the real host of this party. I lift my head and spot Jasper in the crowd. He's chatting and laughing animatedly with Theodore, looking full of confidence and vigor. Our eyes meet briefly, but he immediately looks away, as if I were some kind of monstrous beast. Diana and Felix are also standing close by, showering Theodore with endless compliments, completely oblivious to my presence. At that moment, I finally understood completely. In their eyes, I wasn't family at all. I was merely a tool they could use at will and discard whenever they pleased. They'd remember me only when they needed something from me, but when they wanted to project a glamorous image in front of others, they'd hide me away or even belittle me. Just as I was feeling utterly frustrated, a woman walked over and impatiently asked when the desserts would be served. Spotting me, she immediately assumed I was staff and spoke to me in a tone laced with contempt. I swallowed my hurt and explained who I was, promising to follow up, but she just muttered under her breath, "What a lousy party," then turned and walked away. My cheeks burned with shame, and my heart was filled with humiliation. Though I longed to publicly expose myself as the real sponsor of the party, I still held on to a sliver of hope, waiting for Jasper to say something fair on my behalf. Just as I got up to look for Genevieve, Diana stopped me. Right there, in front of the clients, she ordered me to go back to the kitchen and hurry up the desserts, and mocked me, saying, "You're best at handling little things like this." The clients burst into laughter, their eyes brimming with disdain. Felix chimed in, saying, "Leave it to me, rest assured." Instantly, a wave of humiliation washed over me. I'd poured all my savings into planning this party over several weeks, all just so Jasper could make a grand entrance and climb the corporate ladder, but now I'd become nothing more than a tool for them to curry favor with clients. I glanced at Jasper, hoping he'd stand up for me, but he completely ignored my predicament throughout the entire ordeal. Instead, he even joined in Theodore's praise of Caleb, saying how much Caleb had helped him out. Theodore promised to allocate more resources to Jasper's team, and Jasper smiled ingratiatingly, completely oblivious to my presence. It finally dawned on me. He wasn't unaware. He simply didn't care about how I felt at all. For the sake of his career and that so-called elite circle, he was willing to sacrifice me and our bond as siblings. My illusions were shattered once and for all. In that moment, I finally realized Jasper had deliberately erased me from his life. He'd spun the lie that he'd made it all by himself, aided by some mysterious, noble benefactor. And yet, Caleb had been merely a fig leaf, the supposed noble benefactor he'd invented. Meanwhile, I, the sister who'd stuck by him through thick and thin, who'd given up my own dreams for him, had become nothing but a stain he desperately wanted to shake off. All my sacrifices had been reduced to an unspeakable secret, one he'd rather keep buried forever. Throughout the entire ordeal, my parents wholeheartedly cooperated with this lie, putting down me to elevate their son, all in an effort to shake off the label of failed parents. I forced myself to suppress my anger and calm down. At that moment, the cheerful band music sounded especially jarring. Every single penny spent on this party was earned through my hard work and sweat. They couldn't just trample on my efforts like this. I pulled out my phone, already determined to strike back. An unprecedented calm replaced the hurt and fury inside me. My resolve was firm. They'd driven me into a corner, so I'd make them pay for their betrayal and let everyone know the truth. At 8:45, Genevieve anxiously came up to me, quietly urging me to confirm the final payment of $40,000. She said the restaurant was pressing hard, and it was clear she'd also sensed the delicate atmosphere at the scene. I nodded, preparing to make the payment, but inadvertently overheard a conversation between Jasper's colleagues. They were talking about how Jasper was highly capable and backed by Caleb's support. They even mentioned that Jasper claimed he came from a well-off family with parents who were artists, while I was merely a run-of-the-mill planner here just doing odd jobs. These words felt like needles piercing straight into my heart. Jasper had actually been deliberately belittling me behind my back to make himself look better. Disgust surged up inside me. I forced myself to swallow the nausea and open my email. Inside was a file that Genevieve had sent earlier, containing details about the party. I clicked on the guest list and the event notes, and there it was, glaringly obvious. Zelda Reed, event assistant. My name was listed at the very bottom, right alongside the restaurant servers. Meanwhile, in Jasper's note it said, main sponsor, Caleb White, personal name. Seeing those words made me absolutely furious. I'd paid $60,000, but he'd labeled me as event assistant, while Caleb, who hadn't shelled out a single penny, was hailed as the main sponsor. Not only did Jasper want to erase everything I'd done, but he was also determined to steal all the credit for myself and give it to someone else. My heart was racing so fast that anger and betrayal felt like a volcanic eruption inside me. I'd given Jasper so much, yet he'd treated me this way. I glanced over at Jasper, who was standing near the stage, clinking glasses with Theodore and wearing a smug grin, as if he were the most successful person in the world. He had no idea that I'd already seen through his scheme and had already decided to expose it all. I clenched my phone tightly, my fingers sliding across the screen as I opened the payment app. The final payment interface suddenly appeared on the screen, and the amount, $40,000, shone glaringly before my eyes. I thought of all those nights I'd stayed up late, burning the midnight oil to finish projects just to make ends meet. I remembered the days when I'd scrimped and saved every penny to help Jasper pay for his tuition. I recalled giving up my own design dreams and his promises to me, once upon a time. Those $40,000 were hard-earned, sweat and tear money. I couldn't just hand them over to someone who'd betrayed me. I took a deep breath and gently tapped my fingertip on the cancel payment button. A few seconds later, the payment app popped up a confirmation message. Payment has been canceled. I exhaled slowly, feeling a huge weight lift off my chest. I'd done it. I'd finally stopped putting myself through unnecessary hardship and was finally going to fight for what was rightfully mine. A strange calm washed over me. All the anger and bitterness I'd felt earlier seemed to evaporate into thin air. I knew that storm was coming, but I was ready for it. They'd pushed me too far. Now they'd better brace themselves for a real reckoning. I was going to show them once and for all that I, Zelda Reed, wasn't someone they could take advantage of, and that my efforts weren't something they could trample on without consequence. Within minutes, the restaurant's rhythm had completely fallen apart. The waitstaff, who'd been bustling back and forth nonstop, suddenly froze in their tracks, ceasing to serve the guests altogether. The bartender at the bar began clearing away the glasses and put up a sign that read, "Service temporarily suspended." A woman in a red dress sitting next to me frowned and shouted at the waiter, "What's going on? Why hasn't my cocktail arrived yet?" Another man, growing impatient, snapped, "Where's the dessert? We've been waiting almost an hour." The atmosphere at the scene instantly turned tense. Even the cheerful music playing earlier now sounded jarring and out of place. The jazz band kept playing, but the guests' complaints had drowned out the music, filled with murmurs of "this party is pathetic" and "the service is terrible." I sat quietly in the corner, sipping iced water and watching it all unfold with cold detachment. This was exactly what they deserved for betraying me. Many guests started leaving one by one, grumbling as they walked out, and some even took photos to vent their frustrations. Jasper hadn't noticed anything at first, but his smile froze when the waiter finally pointed it out. Diana and Felix also fell into panic, while Genevieve frantically made calls to settle the final bill. I stood quietly by, waiting to see the glamorous facade built on lies crumble completely. The jazz band stopped playing, and an awkward silence descended over the room as guests began to roundly blame Jasper. I firmly pushed through the chaotic crowd and made my way onto the stage, snatching the microphone from Jasper's hand just as he was still trying to calm the guests. Instantly, the room fell utterly silent. All eyes, Jasper's, his parents', Theodore's, and everyone else's, turned toward me, waiting for me to speak. Taking a deep breath, I held the microphone and said in a clear, resolute voice, "Everyone, please quiet down for a moment. I've got something important to clarify. The entire cost of this party, the price of every single dish you've eaten, every glass of wine you've sipped, every note of music you've heard, totaled $60,000, and I'm the one who paid for it all." My words exploded like a bomb, sending shockwaves through the room. Guests' faces instantly turned to expressions of utter astonishment. I went on, "I'm Zelda Reed, Jasper's own sister, not some so-called event assistant. This party? It's the one I've poured every single penny of my savings into, just to celebrate his promotion to project director." I turned to Jasper, whose face was deathly pale. He was standing next to Theodore, his body trembling uncontrollably. But, I emphasized, Jasper, Diana, and Felix have been pretending all night long like I don't even exist. They've seated me in the farthest corner, treated me like a lowly servant, and yet they've told you all that it was someone else who supported Jasper's career. I pointed my finger at Caleb, who looked utterly flustered. That guy named Caleb, he didn't contribute a single dime, yet Jasper insists on calling him the main sponsor, the great benefactor, who's done so much for him. I paused, my voice laced with disappointment and anger. It's me who's been by his side every step of the way, the one who helped him pay his tuition, cover his rent, and scrape together enough money to get by. It's me who gave up my own dreams for him. But now, for the sake of his own future, he's fabricating lies, putting me down, and taking all the credit for myself. The entire room fell utterly silent, so quiet that you could have heard a pin drop. The air was thick with shock and embarrassment, and everyone's eyes were fixed on Jasper, Diana, and Felix. Theodore's face turned completely grim, his brows were tightly furrowed, and his eyes burned with disappointment and anger as he stared intently at Jasper. Guests began whispering among themselves, some shook their heads, while others pulled out their phones to start taking photos and videos. Diana could no longer keep up the act. She hurried onto the stage and shouted at me, her voice ringing out loud and clear. "Zelda, what are you talking about? Get down here right now." She tried to snatch the microphone from my hand, determined to stop me from going on. I sidestepped her grasp, holding onto the microphone tightly, my voice even louder than hers. "I'm not making this up. Diana, do you dare say you didn't tell the client I was just here to do menial tasks? Felix, do you dare say you didn't help Jasper concoct those lies?" My voice was sharp and powerful, drowning out Diana's shriek. "You'd go so far as to belittle and betray me, just to make Jasper look glamorous in the cultural and creative circles, just to curry favor with your superiors. You took for granted everything I've done for you, and you treated my kindness as weakness. Easy prey." I glanced at Felix in the audience. His face had turned scarlet, and he couldn't utter a single word. "I paid good money to put on this glamorous party for you, but all you've given me in return are lies and humiliation. Do you really think I'm someone you can walk all over?" Diana's face went from red to pale, then from pale to greenish blue. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Felix stood down below, his head bowed so low it seemed like he might bury himself in the ground, too afraid to lift his eyes and meet anyone's gaze. Jasper's face was as pale as paper, and his lips trembled uncontrollably. He looked at Theodore, trying to explain himself. Mr. Theodore, it's not like that. It's just a misunderstanding. His voice choked up, and he couldn't utter another word. Theodore's gaze was as sharp as a blade, piercing straight into him, leaving Jasper too terrified to say a single word more. Jasper glanced around, meeting nothing but the questioning and mocking stares of the guests. He wanted to find someplace to hide, but realized there was absolutely nowhere to escape. The guests were in full uproar, each one accusing Jasper of ingratitude. How could he treat his sister, who had given everything for him, this way? They also began questioning the reason behind the party's sudden cessation of supplies. Someone even pulled out their phone to film and expose the scene. Flashes of camera lights kept popping up, and Jasper's carefully cultivated, glamorous image completely crumbled. Standing tall with the microphone in hand, I watched it all silently. The guests' reactions already spoke volumes. Theodore stared at Jasper with a dark, grim expression, his face etched with disappointment and anger. For years, I'd supported him, from having nothing at all to becoming a project director, but he repaid my faith with betrayal. Now, this is exactly the price he deserves. At this moment, everyone's gaze upon me was filled only with sympathy and approval. I was no longer the humiliated jack of all trades. Instead, I'd become the one who had bravely stood up for my dignity. By 10 p.m., half of the guests had already left, leaving behind nothing but utter chaos in the Tidal Bay restaurant. The murmurs of discontent from the departing guests echoed endlessly. Some complained about the party's abrupt interruption, while others bluntly declared they'd never work with Jasper again. The jazz band had long since packed up and left, leaving the restaurant plunged into an awkward silence. Standing in the corner, I felt nothing but relief. I watched as Theodore dragged Jasper over to the bar, berating him fiercely and demanding to know why he'd deceived him, why he'd lied about Caleb being a sponsor, concealed the fact that his sister had made the payment, and deliberately belittled her. Jasper lowered his head in silence, saying not a word. Jasper had tried to offer an explanation precisely to align himself with the team's positioning, but Theodore was furious. A positioning built on deception is utterly fragile. In the cultural and creative industry, integrity is paramount. You'd even trample on the efforts of your own sister. How could I possibly entrust you with an important project? With that, he turned and walked away. Jasper stood frozen in place, looking utterly humiliated. As I watched him like that, the pent-up anger inside me finally began to ease, leaving me filled with a profound sense of relief. The glossy facade he'd carefully maintained had completely shattered. My parents didn't dare chase after Theodore. Instead, they directed their fury at me. Diana sharply berated me as a troublemaker, accusing me of ruining Jasper's evening with underhanded tactics. Felix, too, lashed out at me for stealing the spotlight and turning what should have been a joyous party into a courtroom-style confrontation. Their accusations left me numb yet lucid. After years of hard work that had never been acknowledged, now I was being made to take the blame. I took a deep breath, straightened my spine, and dismissed any urge to argue with them. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, letting their curses fade into the distance behind me without ever looking back. As I stepped out of the restaurant, Portland's cool breeze swept away the noise and chaos, restoring my inner calm. Jasper sent me an apology text, but as I read it, images of his coldness, hypocrisy, and baseness flashed through my mind, erasing whatever remnants of our sisterly bond had remained. Without hesitation, I deleted the message and blocked him. Though a dull ache lingered in my heart, it only strengthened my resolve to sever this toxic connection once and for all. On my way to the parking lot, I spotted Genevieve holding a tablet displaying the payment confirmation. She informed me that the contract had been terminated and that the final bill for the restaurant would be sent directly to Jasper. I nodded in response, fully aware that those $40,000 in outstanding payments and the ruined reputation of my business were precisely the price he deserved. As I drove off, I left behind the lights of Tidal Bay, along with all the betrayal and humiliation of the past. As Portland's nighttime skyline slowly receded outside the car window, the mess and clamor of the restaurant completely faded from view. I gripped the steering wheel, my fingertips finally ceasing their trembling. A sense of relief unlike anything I'd ever felt began to spread through me. Finally, I no longer had to compromise myself or wear myself out just to maintain a false sense of family. A week later, my desk became my sanctuary, and the steady rhythm of work gradually chased away the lingering shadows of that chaotic party. My computer popped up an email from my colleague Lena. She wrote, "Zelda, I heard about what happened in Tidal Cove. You didn't do anything wrong. Standing up for your dignity is never a mistake. You've already done everything you could. There's no need to feel guilty. I'll always be on your side." Those few short lines felt like a warm current, banishing the last vestiges of doubt from my heart. Lena's acknowledgement only strengthened my resolve and made me realize true friendship isn't defined by blood ties. It's built on sincerity and mutual respect. The party scandal quickly spread through Portland's creative community, dealing Jasper a devastating blow to his career. After Theodore verified the truth, he demoted Jasper to an ordinary employee on grounds of lack of integrity and improper conduct, stripping him of access to core project resources. A clip in which I exposed the truth went viral online, and hashtags like #ungratefulprojectdirector soon topped local trending lists, sparking a torrent of public outrage and condemnation from netizens. Moreover, the $40,000 final payment bill became an unbearable burden for him. Given his current salary, it would take at least 2 years just to pay it off. Occasionally, I'd hear from colleagues about his situation. He could no longer hold his head high at work, facing utter contempt from everyone. Even when he tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, the evidence he'd fabricated and the documents he'd altered to discredit me left him utterly powerless to defend himself. The glamorous public image he'd painstakingly cultivated over the years had completely crumbled. There was no way to salvage it now. Diana and Felix weren't spared either. A detailed exposé published in the local Creative Weekly laid out the full story, revealing their behavior of dismissing their daughter while aiding their son in falsifying records. As a result, their social circle collapsed entirely. Former friends now avoided them like the plague, leaving them to bear the brunt of the fallout alongside Jasper. Caleb's reputation plummeted as well. As a phony nobleman, everyone in the industry knew he'd been stealing credit for others' accomplishments. His partners quickly terminated their collaborations, and his colleagues went out of their way to avoid him. He fell out with Jasper and became complete strangers. Those artificially cultivated brotherly bonds crumbled in an instant. I stopped paying attention to what happened next between them. I began to see the four of them as impurities that needed to be eliminated, so I blocked and deleted all contact information for Jasper's family. The harassing phone calls and insincere text messages soon vanished, and I finally broke free from the grip of fake familial ties, experiencing the relief of shedding a heavy burden. I threw myself entirely into my work, leveraging my professional skills to land a major project, earning my boss's recognition, and a generous bonus. After work, I'd hang out briefly with friends like Lena, never again mentioning the family drama. I rekindled my dream of furthering my design studies, took weekend walks, and occasionally went on trips. For the first time, I was truly living for myself, savoring the freedom of no longer having to shoulder responsibility for others. Looking back on this tumultuous journey, I've finally come to realize one truth. Blood ties are never the shackles of familial love. Respect and gratitude are. Jasper, Diana, and Felix, with their betrayal, taught me that not all family members deserve our wholehearted devotion. Yet it was Lena's support that showed me that true warmth often comes from those genuine people who aren't related by blood. Setting boundaries isn't coldness, it's self-protection. Refusing to tolerate injustice isn't selfishness, it's standing firm in your own worth. Once, I sacrificed myself just to maintain a false sense of family, but from now on, I'll learn to love myself deeply, cherish those who truly care about me, and never again waste a single bit of my energy on people who don't deserve it. And so, this story comes to an end. I'm so grateful that you've patiently listened to my tale, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced betrayal within your family? Have you ever had the courage to set boundaries for yourself? Click the subscribe button, Here I'll share more stories about growth and self-healing. I also hope that we can all stay true to our inner selves and shine brightly, even in complex relationships.